it to, thank you. Okay. I do think this is a really important conversation to take to the operating committee and steering committee because it really is a strategic question. So thank you so much. Great. Okay. Are we ready to move on? Okay. I'm going to keep on going. Next slide. And then, okay. I'm getting a little, yes, I think this is where I'm getting a little lost in where we are. Next slide. Okay, so I want to so I think I actually hadn't covered the previous slide, but here we are. So this classification that that our subject matter experts are helping us get to is built for navigation and connection to services. That is one, Elena was just talking about different purposes and different use cases, right? This is our North Star. This classification is built in increasing levels of granularity. So starting with high level concepts first, and then working next levels will divide the prior level into logical and useful groupings. At this time, we're presenting only the highest level concepts. We'll present the next levels in time. And just note that the aim is to submit these requests for, I'm going to keep on saying this, the aim is to submit requests for concepts for programs to assist with mapping to alternate classifications, right? Just want to note that is the goal. Next slide. I know, and all we have is one slide right now. But this is the first level. Again, what we're working on now is our like second and third and possibly even fourth levels of the classification. So remember, this is the synthesis of multiple existing classifications and the knowledge across even more classifications, right? So we're synthesizing classifications that we have ready at the hand, and we're applying knowledge from other classifications. Again, the goal is to create a classification to assist for the purposes of navigation and connection. One of the things, and this is the work in progress. So this high level, this is not, again, gravity, domain development. There's not a ton of different concepts organized across tabs of screening, diagnoses, goal setting, and intervention. It's just going to be a spreadsheet with ensuing levels and layers, right? The primary realm of need is the basic highest level thing, right? And again, because the idea was to assist not just with like directed navigation through a care coordinator, community health worker, but also self-navigation, right? Like a person or a patient or a client encountering a navigation all on their own, right? And so it's the highest level. It's on I need help with X, right? And so these concepts are the concepts that we arrived at: food, transportation, housing, and shelter. And again, synthesis of existing classifications: financial concerns, utilities, work, employment, material goods, medical supplies, technology access, education and enrichment. And so when they're italicized, we're still working on names. All of these names are to be determined. Again, this is like just throwing it out there. Social connection and social engagement, direct care and assistance, health, safety and disaster services, which is really in the hopper, and then navigation and coordination. Lucy?
Yeah, I'm going to introduce a possibly contrary idea here, which is consistent with what I said in a previous meeting about limits. Thinking about classifications for consumer access may or may not have anything to do with thinking about classifications for systems use. Gravity coming out of healthcare and now relating in more and more detail and more different levels to the whole social care ecosystem. These are systems, no matter how disorganized we may think they are, but they are not the same as a consumer saying, I need help, and looking for the yellow pages. So that's my possibly contrary view of who is the audience here. I asked that question in the last meeting, and I'm not sure that what we do here should be appropriate for consumers, and certainly I'm not sure whether it will be. So I'm just proposing, maybe let's think about, are we talking to each other within systems with system thinking? Or are we talking to 310 million people in the United States of all different languages?
So I'm going to, Jonathan, if you can hold, the reason why it like like our classification experts are best positioned to answer that question. Right, so Lucy's question is, Elena, you are a SME, you don't have to raise your hand. Go for it.
No, I appreciate, Lucy. I always appreciate your kind of grounding perspective. I guess like for me, when I think of like I'm coming from 211 San Diego perspective, we have thousands of people calling us every day for services, right? We are having to know what is available in the community to connect them to, and not just what's out there, but what services specifically can they specifically access. And I think like that also involves, hey, services, tell me what you need to be able to share in order to communicate to us how you're able to help people and serve people. And like the kind of the system connection, to me is very much grounded in how are people getting to things. And there are existing systems, right? Like 211's been around for like 45 years or whatever it's been. So I think like that's like from our very, kind of specific perspective, is that like in helping people understand what is out there and what it is they're trying to seek, because as we know, there's very nuanced realities to what does it mean to access something. If you're trying to access, you've just become homeless and need rapid rehousing versus I'm still housed and I'm about to become homeless, those are really different services. And so I think like, to me, understanding what it is that you need in the circumstance that you're in is like a really important part of like fundamental human access to services. And it is what drives how systems connect. So that, I guess that's how I'm maybe not answering your question well. So, but that's.
You are absolutely answering it, Alana. And the patient-centered perspective that 211 represents for the last 40 or 50 years is unquestionably where we ideally start. But I know in healthcare how difficult patient-centered actually is once systems start trying to do that. So I'm just introducing this as something maybe we just keep it in mind all the time, or eventually it implies some sort of limit or constraint on our conversation.
And I will tell you, Lucy, that's my fundamental fight in the world, is that when we talk about this larger system, the knitting together between health and social services, not losing the shape of social services that are built around how people access really human-centered needs. But rather, how do we allow for healthcare to essentially, take on the complementary shape of what does already exist. And so that is why I'm even a part of Gravity in the first place, because I believe in that deeply. So thank you.
This is a project for the next decade. Thanks, Alana.
Thank you. Any other, but I just want to make sure, any other SMEs, like, I don't want to put 211 on the spot, but any others, because the person-centered design is part of the user feedback of the classifications that the subject matter experts represent. So Lucy, that consideration, like how will people who need help use our classification, is part of how they have been built. Is that, like, I'm going to take what Elena said really beautifully and much more smartly and put it in there. Does that make sense, Lucy?
I hope so.
Okay. So Jonathan, did you have a question?
Well, it's just more of a comment, right? So Sarah, you mentioned on the last call that like this is all new. And so you're innovating, and when you're going through change, there's a lot of uncertainty. But part of it is as you're building it, you need to get feedback from the market, like the voice of the customer. And in this case, it sounds like it's physicians and the care providers that are actually providing services that create that feedback. Right. So one of the beautiful things about the Connectathon is people are getting a chance to like look at some of these things and plug it in and give it real world feedback in real time. And I think that that's what happens sometimes in innovation is people build in a vacuum or in a bubble. And so they think that they have a solution. And when they try to go to deploy it, the market doesn't respond the way that it wants to. Then they get pushed back and then like the momentum fails. So I think we just need to be mindful that as you're doing this work, that getting contextual feedback as you're doing it and inviting those voices to these discussions is how you're going to continue to refine that process. And then it'll take on a life of its own where they start to inform you with what they want to see. And that coalesces with the work that you're doing in real time that allows it to be more tangible.
Absolutely, Jonathan. That's partly why it's important to, like, I have that caveat, the evidence here is different, right? So the evidence in this instance is the feedback that users have been giving these developers of classifications for decades, right? Including people.
That's right.
Right. That's the only evidence we have, right? That's the primary evidence we have. It's not like this is the gold standard measurement tool for utility insecurity. It's over time by user-centered design, not just clinicians, but people needing help. They have shaped this organization and structure. And that actually kind of like goes to this like third bullet here, right? So one of the ways that we have been working on this is that, you know, we tested whether this level seems sufficient, and it didn't necessarily seem complete, but we agreed that we had to go to the second level and then look backward. So now we're working on the second level and third level of the programs that fit under here. But when we were thinking about this level, originally technology access was not on here. But then our SMEs said, our users, our people look for help in this concept distinctly, and we don't want it hidden. And they didn't want it hidden, and they advocated for it being elevated. So it could be found as a first level concept, right? So that was, again, the SMEs bringing their decades of user-centered refinement and design to the synthesis work. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And you and I have talked about this before. Like I think about it from a private sector sales perspective. Like how do you sell this to customers to get it done? And Lucy and I had a conversation in the chat earlier. I use the default about emerging technologies, but as I start to use conversational, generative, and predictive analytics and the AI, they're going to capture a lot of these things, and it's going to make this work easier. But you have to do the work up front, which is the work you're doing here, right? So, like Lucy, like you're going to get there, but like having your voice and Alana's voice and like talking about the voice of the customer to make sure that those differentiations are clear as you're designing and developing to deploy these concepts integrated with technology is going to be important. So that's why I think it's so challenging to get your head around it right now because it's all so big.
Well, and if it's all right, I'll just add, like, you know, I love Connectathons being the space for applied, you know, it's really specific technical gravity work, but like interoperability on a technical level is also happening. Kind of to Lucy's point too, of like, you know, the actual system function versus does the system function reflect what needs to be? And I think like, you know, like our CIE in San Diego, Jesus Christ, has not participated in the Connectathon. That's not in a space that we're in. So like, but I will say, you know, yeah, we are pretty advanced when it comes to systems interoperability and systems talking to each other and actually functionally working within across things. And like, to me, like I, in this present day, have challenges with my integrations because I don't have these standardized terms. So for me, like, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I absolutely need this like already existing from projects I already have. So that also speak to the system kind of creation of what we've been trying to do on a like person leveled care coordination activities.
No, that's absolutely right. Right. And so when those two things coalesce and come together, you're going to have a great flywheel mechanism. Like the point is like now, and I think Sarah, to your point where you're talking about, do you need to have these meetings happening concomitantly at the same time to make sure that you're informing both processes as they go? I think you're starting to see the momentum pick up a little bit, and it's going to feel a little unwieldy if you're not used to innovating and moving in that direction at that pace. But I think that these are all valid conversations and valid concerns, and I think that you're headed in the right direction from a commercialization standpoint.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so here we are. This is the first level. As soon as we are able, and we might do this domain by domain because we've worked on some domain second level and third level concepts already. But I leave that to the subject matter experts. But we have imagine if you go to the next slide, I think there's the next slide. Okay, yeah, so, okay, good. Well, if we go back there, my apologies, I thought there might have been next slide. So there's usually when we do domain work, there's a master list on the Confluence that you download, and it contains those tabs like program definitions, screening instruments, diagnoses, goals, and interventions. In this instance, there's already an Excel spreadsheet on the Confluence that just has these concepts. Next time, when we're ready, we'll have a second level, right? Thank you. We'll have a second level and then a third until we get where we need to go, right? And so that's the work that we're doing here together. So if we go back to the presentation, thank you so much, Hamali. We go back to the presentation. And so any questions on this? Again, please think about comments regarding function. If you have users of classifications who need to weigh in on this functionally, please bring them to the public call. And the idea is it'll make a little bit more sense as we start showing how we're getting into those second and third levels. And everything in italics is really a work in progress. Anything else to say, brilliant subject matter experts, that I did not cover today? Michael.
I'm really happy that we're digging into this. And my only caution in this is that I'm looking at this list. I made a comment in the chat, but for the group, we went down this road for several years with WHO in trying to come up with a functional status classification. And we've gone through
That's why I was,
4 different
yeah.
iterations of it because we never got clarity about the domains of function that could be accommodated. One of multi-axial classifications that were really a mess, and they still are. So we've got to be really clear, and I see some cross-cutting sort of criteria for how we assign things to a class in what this list seems to be suggesting. So good job. I mean, good job of coming up with the first round of classes. I'm just thinking the next step's going to be kind of difficult. That's all.
I hear you. And the great thing is it's good job in the SMEs, right? So we're literally, it's a little bit different than ICF because what they are doing is just marrying what they already built, right? So they've been building and using classifications so it's a little bit easier. I hope maybe
yeah.
not.
Yeah.
We shall see. We shall see. But regardless, it's all good job to the SMEs because they are doing like literally what they've been doing next is literally leading a next level domain and synthesizing and integrating and making decisions about how to marry the knowledge within each of the different separate classifications. Fun times. Go team. Very grateful for our SMEs. They're made, yeah. Oh, and I love so we're here a recommendation to proceed by domain. Okay. Got it. Oh, and one thing I want to note that's a little bit different too is because in Elena or any of the SMEs can talk about this, we're calling this a classification rather than a taxonomy for a couple reasons. There's a lot of science behind a taxonomy, but also because we also imagine things being in multiple places, right? So it's like you might have school meals and food and education, right? Or because that's where people like what they identify as their primary need at this level might, they might still need the same thing downstream, right? It might be different up here, but the same down below. Right.
Then you got a retrieval problem though, because it may be retrieved in 2 different pathways. So there's some of that you have to work through.
Yeah. And
yeah, totally. To that point, that's exactly how we have we have built that is things live in multiple places, but even if it might be tethered to a category, it can live basically because we have the internet, like that versus like a card catalog of go find this in a physical place. But totally, Mike, because I think that the implementation is a huge part of that for sure.
And there's lots of really wonderful stories about that use case that our classification SMEs are able to bring at the drop of a hat. Like this is what our SME meetings are, is all hashing out that stuff. But yes, okay, all caveats acknowledged, Mike. I do want to state that as a person who, like a year ago, had no idea how we'd get here, and thought, as though, like, how am I going to facilitate this work? This is totally outside of my wheelhouse. I'm feeling hopeful. So, deep. Yay. Okay, go team. Next slide. And if we get to the homework, next slide. Oh, sorry, I forgot we have program documentation findings. If you're still with me, okay, the homework, if you wanted the homework for program classification, it's downloading the spreadsheet that's on the master list. It's just what you just saw. I did want to try to revisit some of the concepts in program documentation if you all had time. You're supposed to be here till, or meetings last until 5:30 EST. So I think I'm going to keep on going if you're with me. But no, if you need to drop off, the program classification master file is on the program classification spot in the Confluence, just as usual. A little earlier because we have some out of office folk. All right, so now we're going to talk, remember the program enhancements work has three main areas that we're leaning into to enhance what we do. One is program classification, we just talked about that. One is analyzing our program concepts for sufficiency and for programs that are critical for social care payer reimbursement partnerships. And the other is trying to figure out a path forward for how we document programs. So this is an update on program documentation. Next slide. Again, there's a lot of text on here, but we wanted to keep it on one slide. So one of the problem statement that leads us here is right at present within Gravity terminology. Again, HIT, this exists in other social care taxonomies and classifications in encoded ways, right? But within HIT, we do not have the terminology express only the social care program. So currently Gravity social care programs, a decision that was made by surveying all kinds of people 5 years ago, are part of other pre-coordinated terms. Meaning, if you've looked at our interventions pick list, it's refer to social care program, education about social care program, evaluation of eligibility for social care program. And the example of a social care program would be SNAP, like Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We do not have terms for the program itself, e.g. a term just for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Nor can a care provider express when a patient client's enrolled in a social care program easily, because we only have a very few enrolled in program concepts. That would be a pre-coordinated concept, like enrolled in social care program. I think we have the primary enrolled in concepts we have is in our health insurance covered status as a goal. Or you could also document when a patient or client's enrolled in a social care program as a collection of social care programs with possible statuses. And this is how we do it in healthcare and in other entities, but like a medication list, right? So you can have a list of services and you can say that they're taking it, not taking it at present, it's been discontinued. In a med list, you can do the same thing with durable medical equipment, like a brace, or some kind of ongoing, like a CPAP machine, right? Or even your glucose monitor. What we can envision, either you can documenting when a patient's client is enrolled in it, either as a pre-coordinated concept or in some kind of function where the program concept has a status, right? Does that part make sense? We do not have these concepts sufficiently in Gravity at this time. Okay, next slide. I think we're probably all getting tired, right? There's other problems too, right? And so we have terminology problems. So those were on the previous, and meaning problems like semantics and terms. Like, how do I represent that someone's enrolled in something and I need a term for the program, right? We also don't have what we have across other places, which is a lack. We don't have a lack. We have a lack of a standard chart record section. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's social care or healthcare. There's no standard for where we document social care programs. Like, again, MedList. There is a MedList standard. It is the MedList. The MedList is the MedList across all standards, right? I share a MedList. I share the, right? We don't have that for social care programs, right? Even though we know they're so critical, like SNAP, home delivered meals, like all of these concepts that keep entities well and families well. We have no standard there. We also don't have a standard for exchanging data on social care programs in a patient's care plan. Like, so we have, on the previous slide was terminology and meaning. The program term, we don't have it. We don't have a way to state that a person's enrolled in something. And then this is again on standards for like exchange and documentation. So then we also don't have a standard for exchanging data on social care programs in a patient's list. Again, this would be MedList. If I get a CCD, if I'm sending a patient to a specialist and my record gets parsed into discrete bits and gets sent off to the specialist, right? If I'm getting a discharged patient from the emergency room, it comes in a CCD I can parse into my record. And of course, there's all the resources within FHIR, right? So there's that standard doesn't exist for social care programs yet. Does the problem statement make sense? We have these 5 problems. 5? Maybe 4. So the lack of a program term, 4. The lack of a consistent way to say a patient is to represent that a patient's enrolled in a program or has a thing. And a lack of a common, and I say standard, I mean across multiple versions and entities, the lack of a standard chart record section for where we document social care programs, right? And a lack of standard for exchanging data on social care programs and patients and care plans. And just note, so Mike, Elena, this was again a key thing out of the Social Care Voice Co-Design project, right? Like coordination, right? Like, how do we get to a path of coordination where social care and healthcare entities are coordinating and sharing care across people in ways that are intelligible, right?
Yeah. Can I raise one issue then that you may already have decided, and it'd just be good to know. We've argued in several places now about creating a separate social problem list because that makes it easier to export problem codes between healthcare and social care partners in care processes. And it feels like what we're saying here, a lot of these documentation standards could apply if you created a social care subset of an electronic medical record so that information can be more easily seen, extracted, and moved without a lot of agitation on the part of the medical records folks. And I just don't know whether those conversations have been held, suspended, felt like they weren't productive, or whether that's an avenue to explore.
That is an avenue. I think that's partly what we're talking about. Well, I mean, that is an avenue to explore. Nothing's been suspended. I actually don't make any decisions. We do. We, the collective, right? But if like that, that is something that I think that again it's partly why this is like we're in enhancement stage in some of our conversations in terminology. And bye, Tammy. But Corey, I'm sure Corey's brain is peaked. Technology director, I'm sure his brain is peaked, and I think that's something that we can explore. Again, there's early solutions, the terminology solutions, and then there's the what next solutions. And Mike, a lot of what we, there's other things that need to be represented that aren't concepts in the medical record as well. And Elena, this is like we have no assets list.
Yeah.
Right? I will scream about that every time I am a nurse. I am trained to list barriers, problems and assets and strengths. Like I have a problem list. I don't have a strengths or protective factor list. Right?
Well,
yeah.
if it's okay, because Mike, I appreciate, because you've brought up in other meetings like the really very valid concern around, like, in conversations we've talked about, like, say, like Z codes, for instance, like diagnostic codes for like social problems, right, or social needs. One of the things, and this is maybe also one of the maybe edit propositions for one of the problem statements, is like there's like a person's relationship to services, right? It's a temporal state and it varies, right? Like services they're likely eligible for, services they've used in the past, services they're being referred to, services or programs that they are currently enrolled in, right? Like the kind of temporal and conditional state of someone's relationship to a service, similar to the temporal state of social situations, right? Like my glaucoma is with me until I die. That's not the case for other temporal situations, right? So I think, like,
Yes.
Mike, one of the things you brought up in the past, which I really appreciate, is who gets to say what's true about someone's situation, and where is that being collected, and what, and like kind of the validation process. And one of the things that I do think, because we're going down and dirty with our health exchange of what data we're sharing and exchanging based on different use cases aligned with like data exchange framework and CalAIM in our case. And one of the things kind of what you're touching on is like the social stuff, like the whole package of like what's been screened, what's been further assessed, what has that led to? And that's all the temporal states of relationship to services and programs. It sometimes requires health information like medically tailored meals or housing options for people with AIDS, those kinds of things, right? You have to have a diagnosis. But by and large, you don't need to know labs. You don't need to know someone's, viral load for something. You just need to know, like, is this true? And so one of the things we're always trying to parcel out is like, who's able to contribute this data? And when I think of the kind of the system portion of like how and why these standards are meant to be helpful, is if a CIE is kind of bringing, say, to an HIE, hey, these are the CBOs that can be connected to and referred to, but they need some information in order to be able to do that. The set of data, or like the med list, if you will, or the relation, that kind of thing, like having that like the standard available framework of this is the bulk of what needs to be exchanged. I like that would be a dream, because right now it is like sorting through a treasure chest of like discombobulated data. So I don't know, that's like one of the things in my like practical application of trying to determine, does this live in HIE or does this live in CIE? And I think that's where I think man, I would love for this group to really, I think, maybe flesh that out.
Worth a much longer conversation. I don't want to bog us down here, but Elena, there's an issue to explore about who owns a social care record, who contributes to it if it's person-based, and where does the data live and how does it get exchanged between an electronic medical record and a community social care record, or what a CCH can accomplish. And it's, again, we tried to do this with ICF in Europe in primary care settings for about 5 years to extract some things out of ICF that we felt would be valuable in the electronic medical record. Utterly failed. So this is it's an important issue to think about, and it doesn't take away from the need to document what programs are there or what the classification is, but it's how would you then implement it? And so it's another implementation question. But thinking about it now is a great idea, at least in my view.
Rosie, I'm thinking. I mean, so also this reminds me of Gravity 2020, by the way, just like throwback. So Rosie.
Well, from a patient's point of view, when you are dealing with, some type of social need, be it transportation, be it whatever it is, and you get moved from one physician to the next physician to a specialist, none of that goes with you. And so when you can't get to an appointment, no, you've got to like go through this whole explanation of why you have to work with transportation, you know, in order to get to that appointment. You know, it's not just like I can just get in the car and drive. I'm an amputee. I'm amputated to the my waist on my right side. You know, I don't have the ability. I mean, I can lock my wheelchair in and I can drive a short distance, but I'm not going to drive 2 hours to a specialist appointment because I just can't do that with my left leg. And so, you know, but none of that goes to the next spot. And then you start all over again. So it's very frustrating for patients. And many times we just then say, well, I'm just going to forget about it. I'm just going to like ignore that appointment or not reschedule it or not, because, you know, I've got nasty letters because of the fact that I couldn't, you know, create transportation. And I got nasty letters saying that if you cancel up one more time, we will, you know, and I had canceled twice. If you cancel one more time, we will no longer carry you as a patient. I mean, that's the kind of things that patients deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's that's the real world that we're living with. It's not, you know, we can code all we want, but if we don't have a way of getting that code and getting that information to everyone that needs to know, then, you know, it's got to get into your electronic health record. It's got to be, you know, Michael, I hear you loud and clear, because if it isn't there, then people are there's going to be harm, and there's also going to be issues where people don't get treatment.
Thank you, Rosie. I think you just gave the best answer to it. It's your data, right? Who owns the data? It's Rosie. So where Rosie goes and where it's helpful for Rosie, it needs to go with her, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah. Very powerful. Thank you so much. Thank you. What a good conversation we're having. Any other thoughts on this? Again, thank you so much, Rosie. That was really helpful, really amazing, cogent application of the why. Anyone else have thoughts? We have these program documentation queries. Then we stepped out to really talk about the intersection of social care knowledge and healthcare spaces and healthcare knowledge and what's needed for what. We talked about this in co-design as well, like, you know, referral packages, like WIC, our friends at WIC were saying, when you send a WIC referral, please send along their last BMI and height, and because this is what I need to take them forward. We heard our homelessness experts in their co-design say, if they have a medical condition that qualifies them for this specific service that we offer within our homelessness services, we want to know, right? So these concepts about how we share information to the mutual benefit of the person, right, is something that we've been talking about. And so it's very appropriate that we're here now as we talk about trying to make what we're doing meaningful. And Rosie, thanks again. Any other thoughts? Okay. Thank you. All right, so next slide. I know we just had a really powerful moment, but one of the things that there's no homework for this. This is why this might be a different space, is that there's some homework, but there's also just some conversation finding, like consensus work, thinking that we're doing together, right? Because we have to think whether we need to build new things, new places, new standards, new terminology, new IG resources, new USCDI standards, right? These are the things that Gravity finds itself on the cusp of. Again, all the current USCDI standards came out of these conversations in 2020 and 2021, right? So if we're representing a gap and something we need to advocate for, you know, again, ONC is, well, its new name, ASTP, right? I think that's what it is. Associate Secretary of Technology, I think, yeah. Like, it's all HHS. HHS is ACO, is ACF, is LEAP, is WIC, is it's all of those things, right? So when we start to think about sharing information, the HHS data strategy covers all of those programs, many programs that we consider to be social care in base, but all under the Department of Health and Human Services, right? Of which we are, you know, of which we sit within, right? So one of the things that we want to start talking about is if we create social care program terms within the program classification work, is it okay as we think about documentation to just start with those terms for now? Right? And that's just not race to build a bunch of pre-coordinated terms for enrolled in blank social program because we don't know if they're necessary, right? And maybe enrolled in can be, yes, yay, Mike, yes. And maybe enrolled in can be represented in statuses and other ways that we represent similar things. Yes, okay. Yeah, we are in a minimized pre-coordination frame of mind these days, but we're still bound to some of our prior patterns. And we are committed to pre-coordinating anything that helps represent hidden labor. I'm going to say that always. Like the terms that are pre-coordinated and may seem like excessive, evaluation of eligibility for SNAP, entities are already using those to support the existence of community health workers and clinics. Like this person did this, and this for the patient and client. That was time well spent, right? So as much as pre-coordination is tricky, until we have like all of the knowledge models we need, those terms are still helpful. Ooh. Okay, so I'm hearing that, and again, we no final decisions here, but I'm hearing that starting with a social care program terms for right now seems okay. I don't hear anyone clamoring for an enrolled in every single social care program term. Correct? I see this. Yes, and Corey, yes, exactly. That's Corey's talking about those, like the packages, the data packages you need depend on their program by program basis, right? So coordinated entry for HUD might need one thing, right? You know, WIC might need another. You know, transportation certainly needs all kinds of things, Rosie. Like if you're trying to set up rides, you need to know the details about that person that allow you to develop a ride that meets them in their needs and their access, right? So that could be clinical, like, you know, amputation status is something on a record in a medical history. It might be helpful as we're trying to arrange a ride for somebody, right? Sarah, before we move on.
Yeah, I just was thinking, even using this with the Z coding, I mean, the Z coding can say there's like a, you know, a temporary status occurring and having then the program and then where they are in the program. So then the Z code could go away because the program solved for it, but they are still enrolled in the program. And that's important to note that they have that support. So I think it would be nice to have at least the program in there. And then there's some ways that documentation can support other like kind of temporary statuses a little bit for now, you know? Does that make sense? So like if they have housing and security, but they got into a program that they no longer have housing and security, but that program is supporting their housing.
Yes.
Then now we can say that's not a factor in their social determinants, but they are still in that program, which we can also remember so that we can maybe remind them about maybe the other services that they're getting there as a clinician or even just as a social worker. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I would argue that it's still a factor though, right?
Oh yeah, no, totally is a factor. I'm just
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
like there's a way to work around it right now that you still need the program there in a record as a vital part to even kind of acknowledging.
Yeah, like the SNAP is called the SNAP vaccine. I say this all the time because of how protective it is in affecting other insecurities. So this is why it's like, once I have a patient on food stamps, right? That's really important for me to know. It's also important for me to know whether it's actually helping, because sometimes the award is so small that you're like, ugh, right? But, you know, whether they get congregate meals, and then consistently connected to home, like to home delivered meals because they live in a congregate housing like entity that qualifies by like congregate housing status. These are the type of things that are really important when you're caring for people, right? So yes, this is the why. Okay, I think we're doing great. I think it's 5:28. We spent that last half hour. So again, initial sniff test. Okay, we've talked a lot of conceptual things. Initial sniff test, though, is that not to pre-coordinate and try to see how far we can go with the social care programs as we work on what we were talking about earlier, which is ways to figure out and conceptualize those programs in ways that support reimbursement. All kinds of thoughts regarding ways like missing areas of knowledge of social care in current healthcare, like in health record structure, and conversations about packaging and sharing information. We had all those conversations as well. Next slide. I think we're on to homework. Next slide. Woo! Next slide. I really did it. I talked for 3 hours. So catch up on materials as you need to. Review the cost of the highest level classification on the Confluence. Keep function in mind. Bring your users, those people that use classifications, to the next meeting. Note that the next meeting might not be the 8th, because if all things go as planned, based on this conversation alone, we just spent an hour and a half talking about 2 small things, right? And so thinking that this might need to happen in a special meeting and then allowing the domain normal build to happen in a different meeting is still, it's making a lot of sense to me. Thank you so much. Rosie, yeah?
Sarah, one more thought.
Yeah.
You know, I'm on the patient advisory board for Epic for the MyChart. And I think that some of this could live in that MyChart world. But but we don't, it's not something they've built into it yet, but we talk about it at that meeting often, that this is the kind of stuff that we should be building into it.
Do you know you have an Epic friend on the call and right now? So from your ears, from your mouth to their ears, friend, I just want to note that we're not talking about specific vendor solutions, but just know, Rosie, thank you for your work as a patient advocate wherever you go. And thanks for that final comment. It's helpful.
And so I know that it's not vendor, but I mean, they are more, they're more open to some of our patients' input than they have been in the past. And they really have learned that we have a lot to bring to the table. So
good to hear. I'm really glad. And I want to note that part of like what putting things available on portals allows for is patient-driven editing. Like I have a lot, I mean, again, rural primary care in a very like under-resourced area with a lot of high socioeconomic need patients. I get comments all the time on things that are missing from problem lists, right? Like I reviewed my portal and, middle of nowhere, and this is missing this agoraphobia or this claustrophobia, or this is missing this thing, or this is missing the fact that I have a family history of X, right? So patients are very engaged in those kinds of spaces and could, even could suggest like, oh, you missed that I'm enrolled in X program, right? Like I received this and it's important, or you missed the transportation is critical for me. Don't schedule an appointment unless I have a correct ride, right? Go Rosie. All right. Thank you, friends. See you in 2 weeks, definitely for domain kickoff, which is hard to imagine.
Thank you.
Woo! Not your normal summer. And then maybe in a special meeting for this purpose. Okay, go team. Thank you. Bye.
bye-bye.